Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you read the roll?
Commissioner Arnold,
Present.
Commissioner Sandy,
Present.
Commissioner Saylor, Commissioner Stollard,
Present.
Commissioner Woods.
Present. Item number 3 is public comment. Is there anyone wishing to come forward and address LAFCo on issues that are not on this morning's agenda? And are you Ms. Johnson? I've got your card, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sheila Johnston. I'm a resident of West Sacramento. I would just like to know what the Commission's process is for addressing the Yolo County grand jury report. I didn't see it addressed in the agenda today.
Okay, I think I'm going to let our attorney, Eric May, address that issue.
So the way the process works for the grand jury is that it's like 2 or 3 months that an agency can respond. And so the responses will be, as to the findings and the recommendations, will be considered at a future agenda.
Okay.
Since the recommendation or the findings were all about process, they weren't about the substance of the hearing that we have today. That's why it wasn't addressed as to the substance of the report.
Can I respond to that or ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Or perhaps we could talk on the side if you want.
Well, my concern is that on item 1 of the grand jury report, there were a lot of concerns raised about an item that's being discussed today in item 3 relating to the process of this recommendation that we're hearing today. So I do think it's relevant, and I am concerned, and I'll address those concerns when the item is brought up, that the action or the report that's being presented today does not address the concerns in the grand jury report, and therefore is not a reflection of the city's best interest or the residents of the city's best interest.
And if the commission is interested in that, I can address it at the time of the agenda.
Very good. No, thank you for the comment. And we also can have copies of the commission's initial response to the grand jury's report, which may also deal with your issue. I'm not sure, but we'll find that out. And Christine, can we make those available on the table?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, any other public comments? Okay, we'll move on to the consent calendar.
Chair Woods, I handed you one for public comment. I just handed you another
Oh,
sheet.
I'm sorry. I didn't notice that was for public comment. This is Michael Lutoff? Loftaff.
And just a reminder for everyone, this is for items that are not otherwise on the agenda. If you have an item that's on the agenda, we can take your comment during that item.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, on the consent calendar, we've got items 4, the minutes, and 5, a letter of interest from Patrick McCormick for on-call LAFCo services.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. All right. Now we move on to item number 6, which is a public hearing. This item deals with the Reclamation District and LAFCo's recommendation coming out of its MSR that the city assume under subsidiary responsibilities the activities of the 2 reclamation districts. And the city, subsequent to that, then made application, and at the LAFCo's invitation, the 2 reclamation districts also made application. So that's what we're here this morning to decide. And Christine, would you lead off the staff presentation?
Certainly. Good morning, Commissioners. Christine Crawford, your Executive Officer with Yolo LAFCo. I'll be giving the staff report today. In way of background, I wanted to show this slide to illustrate for everyone that reclamation districts, the ones especially in Yolo County, are approximately 100 years old, and stayed as they were formed without a lot of changes for most of that time. And then after Hurricane Katrina happened, there at the state level and everywhere, quite frankly, there's been a heightened sense of urgency in flood protection planning. And so in the last 7 years especially, there's been a lot of attention paid by the state and locally about flood protection planning. This is a quick visual just to illustrate all the multiple hundreds of local agencies that maintain a portion. I'm sorry, I need to tell you when to advance the slide, don't I? I'm sorry.
The public screen isn't the same screen we're seeing.
I could hooked up.
I am on the map on, I think it's the third slide.
So it's changing.
We're not seeing the map either.
It's advancing for the commissioners, but not
All
on
right.
that screen.
That's okay.
They're running two different.
There are
computers?
copies of the presentation over on the
Maybe
side
two
if
different
anyone
computers
wants a
have
hard
different
copy, that might work better.
What happens when you play away games?
I know.
Need one too.
Man from the corner appears.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes.
That's right.
Should I start over, or are we good?
Sure.
Should I? Okay. This map is just intended to illustrate the multiple hundreds of levee maintaining agencies that are part of the entire Sacramento River flood control system. And this is an excerpt from the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan that talks about the challenges of the state of having multiple local agencies maintaining portions of the system and the call for enhanced regional governance. This is narrowing down to the maintaining agencies just for Yolo County. There's 17 agencies, state and local agencies, participating in portions of the system overall. And so DWR, as an outcome of its flood protection plan, funded a local governance study for reclamation districts that was undertaken by UC Davis in 2014, I believe. And they looked at a range of governance options for Yolo County, everything from consolidating to one agency to the other spectrum, leaving everything as is. And its recommendation was to consolidate agencies for each hydrologic basin in the county, so that each basin could speak with one voice and do operations and maintenance in a coordinated manner. This is just a map that shows the rough hydrologic basins that were identified in the UC Davis study. There's roughly 5 basins for Yolo County. So then LAFCo came into the picture and took up where this study left off and looked in our municipal service review at how it made sense for agencies to organize into each of these 5 hydrologic basins. And this slide is just an overview of LAFCo's purpose, just so everyone understands why LAFCo's doing this and why we're empowered to do this. So in our MSR, we looked at all the basins, but in particular, as it's germane today, the West Sacramento Basin. And this is just outlining what that basin is from a governance perspective. The MSR looked at a range of options in terms of governance, and
You're going too fast.
Could you go back to the slide? One more.
Thank you.
Could you describe? I'm sorry, Christine, could you
what's happening with the slide?
just gloss over this one more time?
Are you on that slide?
No, I'm on LAFCo's purpose. Could you
Okay.
I think this is important information, and I'd prefer that you dwell on it just a bit.
I will dwell. I was being a little self-conscious about all the words in my slides, so I will thank you for the permission to dwell a little bit on them, because I think it's important too. So LAFCo's purpose, among other things like protecting ag and open space, is about the provision of efficient government services. And it is our charge as LAFCo to develop and shape local agencies based on local conditions and circumstances, and to furnish information, i.e. through our municipal service review process, on making recommendations on how local agencies should evolve and develop to respond to present and future needs of the community. Okay, I'm going to flip the slide now. Are we all on the same slide? So this is the illustration of the West Sacramento hydrologic basin, one of the 5 we looked at in our MSR, but the one that we're focusing on today. This shows the existing makeup of agencies we have, and it just illustrates the area that was studied. This,
I would also request that you avoid acronyms in your presentation because there's so many people here. and
Absolutely.
So they know what a municipal services review is. Thank you.
I will do my best. Keep me honest, though. I would
Okay.
appreciate it. Sometimes it's hard to not make a slip. So in the municipal service review, LAFCo studied a range of reclamation district governance options that were considered in our study. We looked at a full reclamation district merger with the city, where the reclamation districts would be dissolved and go away, and reclamation district services would be fully subsumed into the city. We looked at kind of a middle-of-the-road approach where the districts would remain as a legal entity but become subsidiary districts to the city, which means it would become a dependent district to the city, and the district would remain intact, but the city council would act as its board. And then we also looked at keeping the reclamation districts completely independent the way they are today. And the recommendation that came forward through that process was to recommend a subsidiary district. And just to dwell on that for a minute, that was talked about at 2 public hearings, both in December 2017 and in February 2018. There were voluminous staff reports that went with each one, and a lot of discussion, and there's audio recordings of all those discussions, and so it's pretty clear to me how LAFCo narrowed down that choice and why. Just to clarify how we got to that point. So then, following the recommendations in February last year, the city did submit an application in August to make Reclamation District R900 and the city portion of 537 subsidiary districts to the city. That triggers a process where LAFCo then forwarded that application to Reclamation District 900 and let them know that this application had been proposed, and it gave them the opportunity to respond with an alternative proposal, which they chose to do, and submitted that in December. And we've been processing both applications to bring them forward to you today together at a joint hearing. This is a quick highlight of some of the required factors that need to be considered based on the state code. I just wanted to highlight, a full discussion of this is in the staff report, but I'm just highlighting some of the more pertinent ones for the purposes of the presentation. The reorganizations will align with the hydrologic basins. It also will help to separate rural and urban interests and rural and urban flood protection standards into separate agencies and separate basins so that there's better alignment with those boundaries. There has never been any question that RD 900 is very adequately able to perform these services well. That's never been a factor in these discussions. There are sufficient revenues, both for the services, both RD 900 and 537 have Prop 218 assessments in place that fund the services, so they're well funded. One of the other requirements talks about fair treatment of people and incomes with respect to public services. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Some of the other issues that came up in the MSR process, which continue to be a concern, I'm going to go through the 3 big ones. These are also talked about in much more greater detail in the staff report. But there's been a concern that by the city council acting as the Reclamation District Board, that this would increase the city's liability in case of a catastrophic flood event. And so as part of LAFCo's process, I sent a letter to both Reclamation District 900 and the city to ask their legal counsel to opine on this issue and give us some input, which our legal counsel looked at, and there's been a discussion about that. So at the upshot of this is that both RD 900's attorneys and the city's attorney and the LAFCo attorney all agree that just merely the act of the city council acting as RD 900's board is not going to increase the city's liability for flood protection. It's more, liability is going to be determined more by the works, the involvement in legal contracts, the funding, the participating in the planning and construction of projects. It's not going to, liability is not going to be increased just by the city council acting as the board alone. The other thing that's talked about in the staff report is, there's been a lot of concern about protecting, the city's general fund against, some sort of liability case. But I think there's a flip side to the argument that needs to be highlighted as well, where, if there were some sort of a catastrophic event and people's homes were flooded or damaged, the city, it may be a good thing to have the city as a larger organization to help the community recover from such an event. So either way, the conclusion is that the potential for liability does not support either proposal one way or another and shouldn't be a factor. Another issue that's been talked about is the legal implications to the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency Joint Powers Authority, no acronyms, to talk about what are the implications to the Joint Powers Authority. And both attorneys from each side, again, also agree that neither proposal will create any legal implications for the Joint Powers Authority. It's a legal contract. It will sustain these actions. However, both proposals obviously will create some practical issues that the Joint Powers Authority needs to look at, namely the composition of the board members, and also the fact that the way districts would be reorganized, RD 537, after this is all said and done, will exist up in the lower Elkhorn Basin solely and not share any common geography anymore. And so that just may be awkward and not, it may not make sense for them to be part of the JPA anymore at that point. But this is something that would be addressed by the Joint Powers Authority. LAFCo doesn't have any authority over JPAs. There are provisions in the JPA agreement for the Joint Powers Authority to deal with these issues. Another big issue that has been brought up quite frequently is, basically the trust issue with the city in terms of being the financial steward of the levee protection funding. And what was cited as the case in point for me was the city has a development impact in lieu fund that it collects on building permits that it puts into a fund that's intended to provide 200-year levee flood protection. And I requested information from the city on how their expenditures out of that fund and how they've been spending that money. And generally, I think the city, for most of the time, has been spending money on, levee projects, but in the last few years, they've been spending money instead on interior storm drainage improvements. And I think, it's not LAFCo's purpose to determine if the funds are correctly allocated by the city or not, but what I want to say about this is that, this is the reason why, one of the reasons why LAFCo recommended a subsidiary district in the first place, because it keeps the finances, in a separate, completely separate from the city. So there's no possibility for the city to transfer money from RD 900 over to the city's general fund. Those are completely kept separate, and there will be protections in place to alleviate that concern. So this map illustrates what the practical outcome of the reorganizations would do from a boundary perspective standpoint. The picture on the left shows the agencies and their boundaries that we have today. The slide on the right shows after these reorganizations what the new boundaries would look like. And you can see that they better align for the flood control basins. They separate rural and urban issues and just, streamline and create more efficient government by reducing the number of agencies involved. I do want to make it really clear that both the city's proposal and RD 900's proposal would achieve these boundaries. The key question I think that we're down to today for the commission is whether RD 900 would have the city council act as an ex officio board or would remain as an independent district with a landowner elected board. It's really the governance at this point. I also included this slide just to show that governance in the West Sacramento Basin has been studied for 40 years. LAFCo had a reorganization committee look at special districts prior to the city incorporation to look at how the 8 special districts that existed at the time should be or could be absorbed into the city. And essentially the recommendation of that study, which included all the special districts, indicated that the future city should take over the reclamation districts when the new city was well established. Also in 2005, LAFCo's Municipal Service Review recommended consolidation under Reclamation District 900. In 2009, the city's MSR recommended consolidation of the reclamation districts or a merger into the city. In 2018, obviously we talked about this earlier, our study recommended maintaining the reclamation district as a subsidiary district to the city. And I just illustrate this to, convey that we've been talking about this for a long time, and we've, batted around these same options for 40 years. And so there is some history there. It's not new. And so with that, staff's recommendation is that the LAFCo approve the city's application to consolidate RD 900 and make it a subsidiary district to the city. And the reason why I showed this slide again is because I often get asked about a compromise solution and, isn't there a compromise? Can't RD 900 and the city find a compromise? And I guess what I think this slide illustrates, at least I hope it illustrates, is that in my mind this kind of is the compromise. It retains the agency of RD 900, but it also puts it under the city so that the board is fully represented by all the residents of the city, not just the landowners. And there's more transparency and accountability, and it protects, the funding, and I believe it is a compromise that achieves the concerns of both sides the best. So LAFCo proposal 926 is the one that staff's recommending be approved. Also it's consistent with state and local policy. Overlapping agencies, in my experience, tend to create inherent conflict, and so it's not beneficial to the public, and it's good to remove those where possible. The city has more resources that it can leverage to bring attention and funding and political advantage to the levees. It also provides an RD 900 board that's elected by all the residents of the city, including the renters and not just the landowners. I also want to touch on the terms and conditions a little bit. If LAFCo is to approve this recommendation, there are terms and conditions specified in the resolution that RD 900 would become a subsidiary district when, if there's a successful completion to the protest process, meaning if the protest is concluded and the action goes through. The boundary changes would become effective July 1, on a July 1, the way that the State Board of Equalization works. And basically, there's a December 1st deadline to file all your paperwork with the state, and then it would become effective the following July 1. So if we could get that paperwork filed by this December 1, it would be the next July 1, but it would just roll over in a year that everything was filed. Also in the terms and condition, there's a requirement for a finance plan, basically because Reclamation District 537 is going to get split into two pieces, and so their assets and fund balance need to be separated out to go, so the northern portion of 537 that we recently consolidated with Lower Elkhorn, they maintain a portion of the assets and funds, but then the city portion would be transferred to RD 900 as a successor agency. In the meantime, while this is all getting worked out, there's a condition that both reclamation districts need to operate within their adopted budgets, and it also encourages RD 900 to continue negotiating with Department of Water Resources to take over responsibilities of State Maintenance Area Number 4. And in terms of next steps, there is a protest. If LAFCo approves any of these actions before you, there would be a protest process that would ensue. RD 900 has indicated to me that if LAFCo approves staff's recommendation, it will request a delayed protest process, which is perfectly allowable under the code, but just for the audience perspective, the protest hearing would be roughly 3 to 4 months from now. Notice will be provided to that entire yellow affected area on the previous map, basically the city, and notice would be provided via a 1/8 display ad page in the local paper. Protests will be gathered either in writing anytime up until that hearing or at the hearing itself. If there's 0 to 25% protest, the reorganization would go through. If there's 25 to 50% protest, that triggers an election. And if it's over 50%, it automatically terminates LAFCo's approval. So that's how it works.
Question, Christine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question on the protest vote thresholds is, these thresholds would be attached to the landowner weighted average for the percentage votes, or is it individuals? Which one is it?
I'm going to let my legal counsel.
The weighted, as
I believe it's both, but I want clarification.
My name is Michael Colantuno, and I'm outside counsel to the commission. There are 2 concurrent protests, either of which would be sufficient if they met these standards. One protest is among registered voters, 1 person, 1 vote. The other is among landowners. And for the landowners to accomplish a protest, they have to constitute both a quarter of the landowners counting by parcels and a quarter of the assessed valuation counted by dollars.
Okay. The $1, 1 vote versus 1 person, 1 vote.
1 parcel number plus
both.
$1, 1
Okay.
vote on the landowner side, and then 1 person, 1 vote on the registered voter side.
So it could, for the landowner part, either of those tests would constitute the...
Both of those tests. You have to,
You have to do
a
both of them.
successful landowner protest must be a quarter of the assessor's parcels and a quarter of the assessed valuations. You couldn't take a couple of big warehouse owners who have very large assessed valuations and have them drive the discussion. You need a lot of smaller parcels too.
I have a follow-up question. And you said either the 1 person, 1 vote threshold or the parcel landowner threshold, as you described it, they can't somehow combine to become 25% or 50%?
So 12.5% of the registered voters plus 12.5% of the parcel numbers is still just 12.5.
Got it. Thank you.
Trigger an election then? Does that trigger an election?
No, that doesn't.
Lower than 25%, your action goes forward. Greater than 50%, you're done. Your action fails. In the window between 25 and 50%, there's a registered voter election at the next regularly scheduled election where the voters would resolve it.
And then one more follow-up question a little bit earlier. In that protest process, triggering a protest process is any reorganization. So even if, for example, the board approves the reorganization, that's the RD 900 recommendation or application, that's still a reorganization and would still need to succeed through the protest process. Is that correct?
Right. Any of these actions before you today would trigger a protest process. It's normally required for LAFCo actions. There are some exceptions where it's not, but for example, with the Lower Elkhorn Reclamation District consolidation we just did in May, we had a protest hearing at our June meeting. The other thing I did want to mention about the protest process, before I forget, is we have typically done our protest hearings at the LAFCo meeting, but it's fairly common for LAFCos to delegate that authority to the executive officer to perform. And I had a conversation with the chair about whether it makes sense to delegate that to the executive officer in this case because, because of all the significant concern and controversy, it really is just a ballot counting exercise. There's no discretion. And so that's something that may be time-consuming and something that staff can do. So if you would like to do that, that's something you should mention in your
Commissioners, how do you feel about that? Do you want to be there, or as a commission, or can we delegate that to the executive officer?
Clarify that for me, again, what we're
This would be the protest hearing, Commissioner.
There's a conducting authority proceeding, the purpose of which is to determine whether or not a protest exists. It takes the form of a hearing in which people can come to the microphone and speak, and traditionally it was conducted either at a city council meeting or a board of supervisors meeting, because city councils and boards of supervisors sometimes use that to slow things down that they didn't approve of. In 2000, the legislature moved it to the commission. But recognizing that these hearings only look like hearings, they're not really hearings because you can't do anything other than listen. The legislature gave LAFCo the authority to delegate the process of sitting and listening to staff. And it has become something of a tradition around the state that if it's going to be a routine protest, you just fold it into your agenda and you move on. But if it's going to be a time-consuming event, it's probably not the best use of your limited time, and therefore staff does it. The result of that hearing is simply to accumulate any protests that come in that day, and then staff would determine whether there was a sufficient protest. A resolution will be adopted to determine officially whether there was a sufficient protest or not, and that resolution would come to your commission. It would not be adopted by staff.
Yeah, we don't have a choice in the matter, right?
You have a choice who sits behind the dais.
No, I
but
mean,
no
we don't.
other choice. It's all ministerial.
The result of the protest, though, there's no.
Correct. There's no judgment
No
being
action.
Yeah,
exercised.
There's
so
no
I
action.
don't see why we need to
Okay.
do it.
I would support you doing it predicated on two conditions. One is that it occur here in the city of West Sacramento, and then number two, it'd be perfectly transparent, which is to say people can observe the process as it's going on. Fair enough?
Any other comments? All right, we'll go with the delegation.
Well, and that final decision will be made as part of the final vote that
Very
you
good.
make.
We'll repeat it then.
Any other questions of me before we invite the applicants up to speak?
I do have a question for council, and at which point in the process do we identify any ex parte communications that we've received?
It's really up to you. The way we've traditionally done it is before the discussion section. After you've taken public comment, then you can kind of discuss or disclose to everyone who you've spoken to, and then if there's any information that you've learned in those discussions that wasn't otherwise discussed that you think is pertinent to your decision, that you would disclose that as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. All right, we'll now move to the public hearing, and the way that I'm suggesting that we proceed is to allow each applicant, the city and the Reclamation District, 10 minutes each. And in that presentation, they may or may not include other individuals. As I understand it, the mayor will make the presentation for the city, and President of Reclamation District 900, Dan Ramos, will make the presentation for the Reclamation District. Is that acceptable? All right. We'll open the public hearing. And Mayor Cabalden, would you come forward?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, and welcome to our chambers here in West Sacramento. I want to just begin by thanking the Commission and your staff for the incredible amount of work that's been done and the amount of attention and care that the Commission's given to this topic over the last year, over the last 2 years, and as Christine said, over the last 40. And it was 40 years ago that the Commission, in commissioning the local community here prior to incorporation, invited and appointed the special task force of all the special districts that characterized our community to come up with a recommendation for how to construct a city. And the recommendation that LAFCo received at that time in incorporating West Sacramento was that the city should succeed Reclamation Districts 537, 811, and 900 after the city is well established and more of the Southport area is developed. The conditions of which have been, I think, clearly demonstrated that we are now a well-established city and that Southport is very significantly developed since that time. In that action, the decision of the community and of LAFCo at that time was that all special districts within the city ought to be consolidated into the general purpose city government. The exception that was made at that time, the deferment of the reclamation districts, was so that we could focus on the areas that were most problematic: law enforcement, water, and some of the special services in the community. And the reason why that was so important then, and it's even more important today, is up until incorporation, West Sacramento governance, our democracy, was all based on geographic divisions in this place. We had 3 different fire districts, one for essentially RD 900 and 2 for the northern part of the city. We had different school districts just a short period before that. We had different everything based on where you lived in this community. And you had different levels of service and different levels of political representation and power. And the community came together in 1987 and said, no more, we're one city. And both for efficiency and effectiveness and all the things that are in the staff report, but also because we are a single community and that everyone's voice matters the same and that they deserve to have the full benefits and representation of their city government together. And so I'm here to report that we have met those conditions and that pursuant to your recommendations and findings that we concur with the recommendation of your staff with respect to taking the final action today. Very little has changed since February of 2018 when the Commission unanimously and unequivocally reached its conclusions with respect to issues like liability and effectiveness and costs and local democracy at that time. There have been no factual changes. There have been the discussions between the attorneys and additional fine-tuning on some of the dollars and some of the recommended changes in the way that the subsidiary district would work from your staff, with which we fully concur. There have been no other factual changes since that period of time. The only thing that's happened is we have had an election since then, and I mention this because our last election was largely a referendum on this issue. Folks who you've heard from before, very active folks in our community who've been opposed to this process, spoke up and ran, and because we have a healthy democracy here in our community, put forward this question, and both the mayor's race and the city council race were largely fought and contested around this issue. And we had 4 council candidates, and the 2 who supported this action received 20% more votes than the 2 that did not. And in the mayor's race, it was a 40% margin. The voters, and I don't mean to suggest that the voters took this as a referendum to say, yes, we've studied the LAFCo report or the city council staff reports. That's not the case at all. But I mention this because you will hear folks say that on behalf of the public, they're coming to oppose this proceeding. But that's not what the public has said. The public believes in its city, in the success of its city, in the future of its city, and in this notion that we are one place and that everyone deserves to have a seat at the table. As you know, and you could see again from the map, the oldest neighborhoods in our community are unrepresented in both the flood JPA and in a reclamation district at all. And that matters when we decide which levee is next for repairs or what should the priorities be. Representation does matter from those communities in our city. And simply consolidating the district while retaining a governance system in which there are no elections. There hasn't been a reclamation district board election that even the landowners have voted in forever. We've never had to cancel a city election for lack of candidates. We have a very lively, vibrant local democracy in our community, and the residents of Broad Ark and Bright deserve to have their voices and their interests represented as well. This was a system that did well for our community. West Sacramento would not be here today if it weren't for the enterprising reclamation districts of the early part of the 20th century pushing up the dirt in order to create land out of swamps, or what we would call today wetlands, in order to make our community. They were remarkably successful in accomplishing the job that they were set out to do. And today we are a successful city because of that, but we are now a city. And I think we have demonstrated our capacity in order to make this work happen, and that the essence of what a city is about is being able to make these sorts of decisions. Folks have said, I've heard, objections that, well, this is just too important. Flood protection is too important, and what if the city changes its mind and decides it's not going to make it a priority, or what if it decides to work on something else? And I just want to, as the Woodland Davis Water Authority was coming together, if you could imagine that if someone said, oh, yeah, that's great, but it's too important for the people of Woodland and Davis to have any say, and it should be managed by realtors and development interests from that, 40% of whom are from outside of Davis and Woodland, to make those decisions, because you cannot be trusted with your own future. I know you would reject that. We would reject that on your behalf as well. This is the most important issue in the city, and the city certainly has demonstrated that. The voters of the community in their voting, their city council, and their city management as well. And so this remains the most significant issue in our city, and we're committed to making this a success. So I would just, we concur with every aspect of the staff recommendation. There are no more questions left to be answered in this arena, and we would urge you to proceed. Today with me, Councilmember Sandine, who's here in her capacity as the alternate member of this commission, is here. I believe Councilmember Ledesma is either here or about to walk in the door in dramatic fashion. Councilmember Guerrero is here as well. Councilmember Orozco is dealing with a family emergency at this moment, but on their behalf, certainly urge your support, and also offer our city manager, city attorney, director of community development, all of the key folks are available to answer any particular questions that you may have as well. But again, thank you for your consideration, and urge your support of the recommended action.
Very good. Are there questions this time? Thank you, Mayor. President Ramos.
Good morning, LAFCo Commissioners. I'm Dan Ramos, President of RD 900, right here in West Sacramento. First, I want to thank the Commissioners for having your meeting here in West Sacramento. We really appreciate taking the effort to have this here for our community to participate. Flood protection. I want you to please take a look over on that wall. The number one priority of this city and this community has been flood protection for the past 15 years. We take it very, very serious. In terms of what we do. I'm proud to represent an organization, a special district, RD 900, that is providing the community of East Yolo and now our great city with flood protection services for over 108 years. We have a very dedicated staff, and employees have taken the responsibility of flood protection very seriously over the last century, many times putting themselves in harm's way, risking their lives in the middle of the night during flood fights. This is a culture that has evolved because of the commitments of the trustees of the district to focus on a single-purpose mission to provide the best possible service to the community in terms of flood protections. We are, in essence, the special forces of flood protection. We are the Navy SEALs. Now, I just wanted to make it, it's kind of emotional for us. This is a very well-run organization that's going to be wiped out. It's not going to be a subsidiary district. It's just going to be wiped out. And I do want to refute one thing in terms of some of the revisionist history the mayor mentioned about back in 86. I was there. I was involved in this incorporation effort. This was talked about quite a bit in terms of these special districts. And yeah, it made sense to get all the special districts. As we evolved, as this community evolved, and early on with our leaders, Mike McGowan and Bill Christoff, Thelma Rogers, Ray Jones, this flood protection was front and center. We had 86 floods then. And who picked up the ball and ran with it and got this community protected and took the ball further? It was the RD district, RD 900. We are the people that do it. And we do it well. And we're especially focused on it. And I want to keep that theme there, especially focused on it. It was determined at the time, keep RD 900. They're doing a great job. Let them be the protectors of the community. Now we're here for the issue we're here to deliberate on. I respectfully request that the staff recommendation approve the city's application and subsequently approve RD 900's application as a superior alternative to address LAFCO concerns in response to this matter. Our alternative proposal addressed the issues that LAFCO was concerned about. And we also listened very carefully to the earlier public hearings when the mayor made his concerns regarding representation, conflicts in terms of the recreational activities and maintenance of our ditches. We thought very carefully, we came back, we addressed all the concerns. We know that LAFCO staff liked our concerns, and I'll get into those a little bit. But first, before I do that, one matter that we are disappointed in terms of how studies were conducted in terms of this. One of the major components of this is, for LAFCO, is cost. Will it cost the same or less for this to happen? It's a major consideration. The city provided a snapshot in time analysis of them becoming subsidiary districts. We analyzed their thing. We looked at how they ran the port as a subsidiary district. We looked at how they ran West Sacramento. Yes, the money stays separate, but they can charge overhead for city staff on that. It can be right in their budget, and that's how they did it. You most recently, your last meeting, kind of gave the Port Commission in their review, saying they shouldn't have the city manager's salary, half of it paid for by the Port District. There is some checks and balances here in terms of this important mission that we're all on. So I'd ask that, and we'd be more than happy with delay on this, that a third party look into this cost factor, look at our report, look at the city's report, and give you a factual basis for the cost analysis before you make a determination on this. Internal drainage. That appears to be the biggest conflict what we have with the city. And we looked at that, and we agree with the mayor and the city in terms of it's time for us as a district to turn over internal drainage to the city and have them perform that function. It makes sense for them to control internal drainage from A to Z. When a development project comes in, how they plan detention basins, how the water is generated and discharged, it makes sense. The city now has the responsibility for the discharge permit with the state and all the laws that occur there. Now is the right time to do it. By doing this and turning over our most recent assessment for internal drainage, they have the funds to do it. It takes that conflict out of the way. And I agree with the mayor and staff that they can now plan better in terms of how drainage works, how it combines with recreational activities. We take that conflict away. This is part of the compromise that works. I want you to really consider that. We proposed that. They didn't. We also proposed, we're the ones that proposed LAFCo's mission. Let's consolidate the districts. Let's 900 take over 537. And we reached out to the state on Maintenance Service Area 4 to do that. We've had very good luck with that, and we'll continue to do that. So we have the one basin. We addressed that. City did not in their proposal at all. It was very short on that. Liability issues, I'm going to turn it over to the representative for 537 to get into that detail here in just a second. But one of the biggest thing, and this goes back to the compromise, we're more than happy to sit down, RD 900, in terms of a consolidation effort, and relook at our governance, how we govern ourselves. We're very supportive. If this is what we need to do, sit down with the city staff. We have no problem doing that and putting together, going to the state legislature to change the government laws in terms of how our board is compromised. Not make it landowner. It needs to be city representatives, a city election process. Let's go do it and get it done. So these issues of representation and fair and transparency are addressed. We'd be more than happy to sit down and do this. So I just want to say that's the compromise that will work for this. But important is to keep a single purpose focused on flood protection, not distracted. The city council is very busy with a lot of other responsibilities and stuff. Have a citizens board. It's kind of like belt and suspenders. It's very independent management. We have very qualified people in this community that can sit on this, our board as citizens elected in that can do a very good job of the belt and suspenders of what we're talking about. In closing, I respectfully request that the commission do the right thing and reject the city's proposal and recommend our RD 900 proposal, along with the effort to sit down and look at our governance. I think we're more than willing to do that. We pledge to sit down and work on an effective transition of our drainage responsibilities and work with city staff like we have over the last 30 years since incorporation to provide the citizens the best flood protection they can have. And want to thank you for your consideration. And I now want to introduce Representative from 537.
Thank you, Dan. And this will be trustee 537.
Correct.
Tom
Correct.
Ramos.
I'm Tom Ramos, Dan's brother. Thank you, and I got a short period of time, so I'll consolidate this, and I may have to come back during public hearing if possible. But as a trustee of 537, we've supported the Elkhorn consolidation that happened up there, and we knew that that would eventually require the detachment of 537 and find a new home. We have formally protested the city's application for the governance takeover of the reclamation districts, and we strongly support 900's alternative proposal for governance in West Sacramento. But several points that I want to bring up, and liability, it's real. I don't agree with the executive director's statement that both legal minds have found that there's really no liability just by the switch. I think common sense would tell you you're more directly involved in its governance, its financials, its operations, that it's there, and if the worst happens, there will be consequences. How much, I don't know, but only a slight increase in the liability is a tremendous ramifications, not millions, not tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions. So we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. And it's kind of telling that the LAFCo council reached out late to ask for further clarification from the city on the issue of liability. And he asked directly to the city attorney. What they got back was not a letter from the city attorney. It was a letter to Christine from the city manager, basically regurgitating maybe, maybe not, who knows. But I think it's very telling that the city's attorney and his law firm is not on the record in this situation. So our time is up. Hope they'll see you again.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions or comments by the commissioners at this time?
Yeah, I have a question. It might be for Dan, just because it was responding to something that he said. On the internal drainage issue, you indicated a willingness on behalf of RD 900 to turn over some of those responsibilities to the city. Can you clarify that a little bit more?
Yes, I think this is what kind of came up during this whole process, and our board gave it great thought, and said it is time for us on our internal drainage. If we're bathtub, rain falls here and we detain water in detention basins and it ends up in our main canals and then pumped out. The city, they do all the planning when it comes to new development and existing development in terms of how drainage facilities are designed at the source, then to get into our system. And it makes a lot of sense. It gets very confusing in the planning process where a development entity would come in and start planning with the city. And there's not only now planning for, drainage, but there's the MDS, all the permits that the state requires that the city officially does now, that it gets off, because all of a sudden, all that planning happens. A lot of times, sometimes we're called in late to kind of give our input to it. It just makes sense now to we're well-funded in terms of drainage and the ability there. And the city does have the ability, with the funding that we'll turn over to them, to even enhance that with further grants. They probably have better resources to do that. And I think the best thing about it is they can now plan effectively some of the open space components of our drainage in terms of the recreational activities. They can do, I think, really combine those and do a good job. But they're going to have the responsibility for how they do maintenance of the drainage facilities, because they'll have that responsibility. But it's better one entity direct that. And we feel it's time to do that.
So how was that decision made by the board of RD 900?
How was it made? In our proposal to LAFCo.
But I mean, was there a vote of the board or something like
Yes,
that?
yeah, there was. It was a vote of the board to resolution to, in our proposal to LAFCo to give up that, authority.
And the same with the consolidation of districts, that was a vote of the board?
Yes, it was a vote of the board in terms of our proposal, alternative proposal to LAFCo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right. Yes,
Dan?
Dan,
I have a
don't go
question.
away.
I'm looking at the written material provided by the LAFCo staff. One of the comments about, and there's a description of the considerations that the Local Agency Formation Commission by law is required to apply. One of them is the extent to which the proposal will promote environmental justice, meaning the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the location of public facilities and the provision of public services. And there's another one of these comments or one of the criteria that we are required to consider is the effect of the proposed action of all alternative actions on adjacent areas, on mutual social and economic interests, and on the local governmental structure of the county. Mm-hmm. So with that lens, can you describe the governance structure of RD 900, how the members are elected or appointed, how they are, what the current status of those terms is, and when the last election took place, and how it unfolded?
Commissioner Saylor, I'll do my best here, okay, and I might have to call from assistance from some of our staff here, but we have a 5-member board. We're fully staffed now in terms of our board members. We have staggered terms, staggered 4-year terms for the. We are governed by the state water code. Water code has been around, Reclamation Code, water code for over 100 years, and that's how we are elected in terms of landowner elections. And when these terms come up, there's there's an advertisement that's put into the local paper or announced through the website, all the different things in terms of we have a term coming up. Does anybody anybody in the community that owns property, they have to be a landowner, that owns property can get I think it takes some signatures on a petition to register to be a candidate for one of those seats. And that's how it works. That's the election process for when a seat becomes available in terms of the board. It's advertised and it's done. Many times it's advertised, we have nobody does. And so a lot of times the commissioner, the trustee that's there, if he wants to remain there, we go back and seek a special appointment from the Board of Supervisors that, we had no election, they wanted to continue the term. We vote as a board to recommend them for a further term with for that seat. So that's kind of how the process goes, but I think I can.
When was the most recent board election?
It was, we just recently had 2 50-year members of our board, 50 years. Great service, Pete Palmadesi and Bill Denton, that retired. And that was less than six months ago. And we advertised for those open seats. We did it in the local paper. We did it on our website. We did it in all the local community social communication that we have opening. Please provide. We gave enough period of time, a 3-week period of time, to propose for anybody to write a resume or a letter of interest. I did it myself. I went to some of the community leaders and suggested, might want to apply for this position. We really went out of our way to make it a very open process. We only received 2 requests for the seats. That was Christopher Palmadesi, who is a longtime family member here, and Joe Deanda, another longtime family that's been in West Sacramento for those positions. There was no other request to do it. That negated, so we recommended at that time that they be appointed to the position, and that's how it happens. Now, I want to go back and say, that's the system we have to work under California law. That's it. But we understand the issues of social justice and all this, kind of that issue. It's time to perhaps make a change. And like I say, there's not an issue. I don't need to sit on this board. I'm a landowner here, but I'm not a resident, so if that, so be it. If we need to change this, that it's just residents only, and maybe with landowner residents, however we end up doing, we are more than open to sit down and have that done and go to the state and get legislation done to make it an open election process. We'll do it. That's the compromise I think that really works here for everybody, because we say single purpose, but we have a board, a very effective board focused on this flood protection, diligently watching it, not a city council that's distracted in many things they need to do for this community. I think it's a win-win, so I hope we can do that.
So, Mr. Ramos, if there is an election for the board of RD 900 under current law, how are the votes tallied?
They're tallied by landowner. It's all about assessed value, and I want to be careful because I think our legal counsel, our staff can kind of maybe be a little detailed, but, you know, it's about acreage and value of your assessed, you know, if you have improvements on your property, there's certain values that come with that, and that's the, you know, for every $100 of assessed valuation, or you get one, you know, $1,000, you get one vote, and there's a weighted way to do that, but it's a landowner and assessed valuation type of vote. And please let it get clarified, because I might not have it totally accurate.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Okay.
I have another question for the city,
Okay.
if I could.
Mayor Cabaldo, question for the city.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, so my question has to do with this issue of financial liability to the city. So I think it would seem to me that that would be that'd be a significant concern for the city leadership, because if this is our staff have looked at this issue, have consulted legal counsel, but what's the city's assessment of the potential liability that you may be incurring if there is to be one of these terrible floods that could happen in the future?
All right, I'll turn it over to the city attorney, since he's been asked to be on the record on this topic in just a moment for the analysis of that question. The way we approached it at the outset was our initial response to the LAFCo invitation was, I think, as your executive officer said, to propose a merger between the reclamation districts and the city. That in terms of LAFCo law and simplifying and everything, that seemed like that was the sensible approach. But it became clear through your process of due diligence and hearings and analysis that from both your perspective and ours, we realized that did create a significant liability challenge for us. That the merger of the two agencies we would then succeed to all of the liabilities and commitments of the reclamation districts themselves. So that's why the successor agency, the subsidiary agency approach emerged, and the city attorney can address that component. But obviously, this is a significant issue for the city, and we would not tread lightly into this if we weren't absolutely certain, based on the legal analysis and the case law around this issue. Having said that, I do want to say that for our residents, what your executive officer said is exactly true. In the event of a catastrophic flood to which the responsibility can be assigned to government, there is the flip side of this question. Will they be able to get the liability coverage that they need to rebuild, to sustain themselves in our community? It's not, our actions as government are not just about how do we insulate ourselves as much as possible from the consequences of the actions that we have taken or not taken, damn the consequences for the people that we represent. So it isn't just about the question of how to avoid any liability. It's about making sure that it's properly parceled out where it belongs, while also assuring that the people and the property owners of our community can be appropriately protected. So with that, let me turn over to the city attorney.
Thank you. Jeff Mitchell, City Attorney for the City of West Sacramento. So there's a couple of points in response. I appreciate the mayor's last point. It's a little ironic that we're spending a lot of time talking about how not to be liable and not provide protection to citizens who may be impacted by floods. However, that's part of my job, is to advise the city on potential liability. We've looked at this very carefully. You've seen a lot of written material from both law firms, or several law firms. By the way, the last communication from the city was largely written by our firm. Our feeling was it was a response to the executive director of LAFCo, and so it was more appropriate to come from the manager directly to her. That's why it didn't come on my letterhead, but I fully stand behind the analysis, and most of that analysis was done by our firm. Our belief is that, as I think staff indicated, and as the attorneys for both sides have indicated, the mere fact of of taking over control as a subsidiary does not create in itself liability. The cases that are cited in the materials that both sides have presented really deal with liability arising in other circumstances. So for example, the leading case out of Monterey, in that case, the county of Monterey had indemnified the federal government, and so the court was perfectly willing to say under those circumstances, Monterey had agreed to be liable. In addition, Monterey completely controlled the financing. The Joint Powers Authority that did levee work had no independent source of funding. That is not the case here. Both RDs have funding, as well as WSAC. And WSAC provides a significant amount of funding to RD 900 for levee maintenance. And then the third factor that was important to the court was that the work of the JPA was performed, in fact, by city staff, not by employees retained by the JPA. So the factually were very different, and I think the legal conclusion is entirely different. The city is very mindful of this. There are some economies of scale to be obtained by having the city council be the governing board of RD 900, if that's the direction you choose to go. And there are some services that the city could provide in terms of administrative services, but there is no intention that I'm aware of to change the basic structure. The RD will continue to be responsible for maintenance of levees, will continue to have independent staff. That staff will be answerable directly to the governing board of the RD. They will not be going through multiple layers. I think there was some reference in one of the documents from the RD that there'd be multiple layers of oversight before the RD staff reported directly to the council. That is not the intention of the city. So on balance, we think that while there are some potential risks if it's not managed correctly, we're fully aware of the way to manage it correctly and intend to do so. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any other questions for either applicant?
I actually have a question that's probably best directed to our staff in terms of process going forward. Should we approve staff recommendation? There was a question brought up with regard to cost, and that is an important consideration that we take up. Will there be future opportunities for this body to assess the performance of whatever makeup comes out of this current process?
Yes. One of the benefits of the subsidiary district option is that it does retain Reclamation District 900. It does retain an agency that LAFCo will continue to do municipal service reviews on. And one of the required determinations has to do with adequacy of service and cost. I do want to take this opportunity to address the issue of cost. And there has been a misunderstanding perpetuated from the MSR that's carried over into this process, and that's the notion that LAFCo is required to make a finding that this action be equal or lesser cost. That is only the case if LAFCo initiated the action. So since LAFCo did not initiate these proposals, it is not a required determination.
Okay. And while I agree that it's not required, we're all concerned about cost, and somebody has to bear that burden. So I have a question for the city on cost. In some conversations I've had in the last few days, that issue's come up, and the comment was that there's no way that the city can take this on without having some additional cost. And this gets into how the relationship, if the proposal goes through, as staff has recommended, how the executive director, how the RD 900 staff would report. Would they report directly to the city council? Would they report to the city manager? Would they report to the community development director? How would that occur? And if it does occur, which seems likely, how would those costs be dealt with?
So largely for the reasons that the city attorney just described, the CEO of Reclamation 900 would report directly to the city council in its capacity as the board of RD 900, not in its capacity as the city council. So were the staff to report through the community development director or the police chief or the city manager, then we would become entangled in the liability issues that the city attorney was just describing. So when he said we know how to deal with liability, it has the same effect on the cost structure. So the only difference is that instead of the Reclamation District board meeting, once a month in a different location, we would most likely meet here, and the executive director would come here. But the rest of the operation and the rest of the existing management structure remains the same.
Personnel matters and those kinds of things that typically get discussed between a manager and the council would be done, or the city manager, would that be done directly with yourself as the mayor, or how would that all occur?
The specific protocols internally would obviously need to be reaffirmed by the council in its capacity as the governing board of the district. So it's not a decision for me to make as the mayor. I would be a member of the board of RD 900, no more, no less. So the specific protocols about how that would work would need to be determined. But they will not go through the city or administrative function. Now, with the Port District, there are cases, and this is true for other districts and entities underneath the city, there are cases where it does make operational sense for the special agency to contract with the city for payroll processing rather than contracting with an entirely different firm at a higher rate for a small number of employees. So there may be instances where there is a relationship in that way, but not that involve the management or supervision of the district or its staff through the city's personnel.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Any other questions before we move on? Yes.
If I could just chime in a little bit on that too, I just want to add and note that, the revenue sources for RD 537 and 900 are set through assessments, which are protected through the Proposition 218 process. And so the city, should it be operating as the board of directors, is still going to have to live within their means, so to speak, from those two sources. And the city will not be in a position to just raise assessments. It has to go through a landowner Prop 218 process, and so the landowners are protected through that as well.
Very good. Thank you. All right. I think we're ready to move on to the public hearing. We've got 13 comment cards. The tradition in West Sacramento is for 3 minutes each. That means we'll go about 40 minutes. Is that acceptable? We can adjust that time, but I'd recommend we.
You can always encourage brevity too.
That's right, and
No need to repeat what's been said.
always brevity. Before we start with the first individual whose card I have in front of me, I'd like to just remind everyone, please fill out a comment card if you haven't already and you want to comment. They're over there, I think, on the table, and give them to our clerk. All right, we'll start off 3 minutes apiece, and I think everyone knows about the timer, and I'll need to stick strictly to that in fairness to everyone. Sheila Johnson, please step up.
Good morning again, Commissioners. Thank you for your time. My name is Sheila Johnston, and I oppose the city's application to take over RD 900 and 537. You should be aware that the residents of West Sacramento have gathered signatures to protest the city's application to take over RD 900 and 537. Over 240 residents, these include property owners as well, have signed the petition urging the commission to accept RD 900's alternative proposal. I have brought the petition with me and the list of signers, and I'll hand that over to you at the end of my testimony.
Thank you.
I wanted to read just a few comments to illustrate the community's opposition to this proposal. RD 900 has always been a quality agency. Leave levee maintenance to the professionals that already know what they are doing. I want proven experts in charge of my safety. I read that LAFCo's primary duty was to protect agricultural land. The city has rezoned all or nearly all ag land out of the general plan, but where was LAFCo? Better yet, where is LAFCo? My thanks to the grand jury to investigating our situation. I do not want flooding to be liability on the city. It is careless for the city to assume such risk. The grand jury report was very telling. Agendas that compromise safety and common sense have no place in my hometown and city that I love. Reading the LAFCo report, we would be foolish to change what has worked for 100 years. The citizens of West Sacramento do not need to take on the liability of flooding. As a longtime resident, I want to know that we are going to be cared for the way we have been for decades. Our city does not have the knowledge or experience to protect our levees. Our grand jury agrees. Protect our city from floods and our citizens from being taken advantage of. Since we don't have a chance to vote on this, we need to speak out on our own behalf. I would concur with these statements. The city of West Sacramento does not have the bandwidth nor the expertise to focus solely on flood and levee maintenance. And I understand that your proposal that you're reviewing today is to make it a dependent special district, but that is still cause for concern. There's still going to be bureaucracy. There's still going to be red tape. I got an email from the City Parks Department just a few days ago saying, oh, we only have 2 staff dedicated to irrigation issues in the city. It's impossible for them to be able to maintain everything. That goes to say that's a concern as a citizen here, a resident here, that with red tape, with your bureaucracy, there's bound to be delays. Keep departments, keep governments that have been publicly elected and publicly created separate. As a strong proponent of transparency, it bothers me to my core that LAFCo is recommending consolidation without cause. As the grand jury report cited, there was not an independent third-party analysis of this proposal. So that's also cause for concern.
Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you very much. And Christine, have you had an opportunity to get the initial response to the grand jury's report on the table?
Terry is pointing that they're available over on the shelf over there by the door.
Great. Anyone that would like to look at the response, you've got it there. Next, we've got Ryan Johnson.
Morning.
Morning.
My name is Ryan Johnston. I oppose the city's application to take over RD 900 and 537. I truly believe that the city of West Sacramento is in no position to take over the levees in West Sacramento. My opposition is based on multiple levels of concern. Some concerns are as follows. Number 1, trust. The city of West Sacramento lied to the residents at their May 23rd hearing. The city attorney claimed that the city would not be held liable for flooding, and even went on record to state that the city would not be held liable should this takeover be successful. Furthermore, the city chose to go into closed session to discuss liability, which for a resident is concerning. Why would our publicly elected council go behind closed doors to discuss our public safety? This is why the separation of public bodies is needed. I do not trust the city that has I do not trust that the city has my fellow residents or my family's best interest at heart. What is furthermore worrisome is that the city's failed to secure funding to improve 40 miles of levee that have yet to be updated. The city refused to hire an experienced lobbyist, and that decision proved to be embarrassing for the residents of West Sacramento. Now our city is at risk of delayed levee maintenance while other cities have secured the funding they need to protect their residents. Do you think that this is a governing body that should be in charge of our levees? I do not think so. Number 2, transparency. The Yolo County Grand Jury cited LAFCo did not do their due diligence in conducting a third-party analysis of the city's application. The purpose of LAFCo is to ensure transparency by the governing bodies, but your staff did not even uphold its basic tenets of why you exist. How are you able to ensure our best interest is central to your decision today when you do not even have enough information to make an informed decision? Number 3, communication. The city claims that it embraces dialogue, but it refused to meet with the Reclamation District Board about their alternative proposal. The city clearly disrespects publicly elected board members, and in refusing to meet with the RD boards, disrespects the residents of West Sacramento. I do not want the city representing my family's flood protection, as they have proven time and time again that they do not represent, or excuse me, do not respect the boards that West Sacramentans respect. We have supported, 170 years is a long time. It's successful 170 years. Why are we doing this? I've heard some reasons explained, and this is safety. It's successful safety record. I don't understand.
I'm sorry. Thank you for your comments. Larry Langford?
Good morning. I'm born and raised here in West Sacramento, have complete faith in the reclamation districts, have all my life, and my parents before me as well. I get confused listening to these people saying that the city wants to take it over, yet the reclamation district will still be independent. So what is the city after? It's got to be a question everyone has to ask. If they want to take it over, yet let them still be responsible, what are they looking to get? Let's look at the big picture, the levees being the huge picture that we want to look at and give the responsibility at. Let's look at the smaller responsibilities and see how the city has handled them. Take this building right here. That big screen up there doesn't even work. We have to bring something small in like this so that we can see their displays. Our fire departments, our police departments, our city roads, they're not being maintained and well handled. So why would we want to give the responsibility of our property, our people, the lives here to somebody who's not a specialist in it? I think of the reclamation districts and I think of medical care. Are you going to go to a podiatrist if you want to have a heart transplant? I don't think so. Even in sports, baseball, they have specialists for every single level. The reclamation district is the specialist that we have and that we need to keep our cities safe. They've done a great job with our flood control. Never had a flood here that I'm aware of. Why ruin it? I hear everybody in here talking, and I got to ask the same question that I'm sure all of you have heard before. If it ain't broke, why fix it? Period. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Pat Flint.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and other members of the LAFCo board. My name is Pat Flint. I'm a lifelong concerned community member, also known as Mrs. Kravitz to the mayor. My focus for West Sacramento has always been public safety. After living through the aftermath and devastation of Hurricane Camille in August of 1969 and seeing the devastation of Hurricane Karina, flood protection is the reason that I question the recommendation you are moving forward with. Most of the damage from both storms were storm surges, levee breaks, and flooding. Atmospheric rivers and storm surges are devastating to cities surrounded by water. West Sacramento has come close to flooding in the past, but our reclamation districts prevailed. We trust them to protect our levees, not the city. Liability to the city is a huge issue. We do not take cost savings, you do not take cost savings or liability seriously in your report or your recommendation. You have done nothing to assure the residents of West Sacramento that your recommendation is in our best interest. Are you purposely ignoring the grand jury report? Do any of you live in our city? Many will say that this is a political issue. For me, it is a public safety issue. West Sacramento is surrounded by water and levee systems. For the following reasons, I believe the city is not ready to assume responsibility for the flood protection. Our natural water systems, canals, sloughs, wetlands, and Lake Washington are being replaced with detention ponds. This ecosystem, RD 537 and RD 900, have managed our flood protection system for over 100 years successfully. I do not trust the city is in a position nor prepared to take over the control of our flood protection at this time, especially our levee system. I do not trust that they have the expertise nor the liability issues solved to be successful. Cost savings are minimal at best. You did not prove otherwise. Why the hurry? Why are other areas in the region not forming subsidiary districts? I do not trust that the city will keep flood protection funding separate for the sole use of flood protection, as I have observed with the governance of the Port of Sacramento. The city does not have a plan in place to ensure evacuation of residents in case of catastrophic event, such as a levee breach or dam failure. They have stated we are on our own. The city has no written plan and assurances to the public that will keep us safe and the funding in place for flood protection. They missed 2 federal funding cycles. Who sits on the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency? City council members. Who sits on the Port of Sacramento Board of Directors? City council members that also control land transactions and the funding of the port. City council members also will be sitting on a subsidiary Reclamation District board and controlling those funds. I guess my time is
We've run out
up.
of time. Thank you, and we've got your letter, Pat.
Thank you.
All right. Danny Langford?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here to ask you not to approve the application of the city also and to leave the RDs as are. I live within a half mile of the river, and that was my husband that spoke earlier. And I've seen the RDs nursing our levees in high water issues and heavy storms, including nursing boils, of course, before our setback, overnight, 24/7, day in, day out. Made me feel safer knowing they were there because they are the experts. If you look at Katrina, the levee failure wasn't from it going over the top, it was the erosion underneath, as we've all heard. I brought that to the city council. I was mocked and belittled by our mayor and some of his friends, and yet now we use that as an example. I can't trust our city to do the right thing if they're going to mock and belittle me when I bring a concern, a valid concern, to them. I've witnessed at several meetings. Oh, I want to back up. There was a safety meeting soon after that whole issue happened, and we were told we were on our own to head to the overpasses at the freeway because that's the highest point. Honestly, I don't want, in case of a catastrophic event, I don't want to be stuck in traffic if the floods hit. I'll hit my attic if I have to, but really, scary. I've witnessed several meetings where RD's trustees have asked to have meetings with our council, including a letter I obtained from the RDs to the city through a public records request, to no avail. Councilwoman Sandine directed staff after a council meeting to set that meeting up. Never happened before they moved on the application. So no, I have no faith that our city will do the right thing. I think our parks and amenities are overshadowing things, and I would hate to see the tax dollars that I helped approve to go to the RDs for flood protection end up going for parks or bike trails on those levees. Why not let the voters decide if that's the case? Because unlike what our mayor stated, I guarantee you the majority of people, especially where I live, would not approve the takeover by the city and have huge concerns because flood protection is on all our minds, especially those of us that live so close to the levee. Lastly, I know I'm running out of time. I have copies of Bill Christoph's letter that I'm sure you guys have seen. I read it into the record. It was addressed to you in February of 2018. And I do have copies to remind you because he is such a highly respected man and his words should be taken seriously. He sleeps at night knowing RD 900 is in charge. He is not in favor of the city touching the money or the abilities that the RDs have. So I will leave these for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Martha Guerrero.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners. Martha Guerrero. I'm here on behalf of Bill Christoph and myself. Bill Christoph, who served on West Sacramento City Council for 30 years until his retirement in November 2016, and as the city representative on the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency from its creation in 1994 and until his retirement. I'm here as a private citizen, but with experience on city council, and also as a planning commissioner, former chair, when the general plan update was approved for 2035. I have more than 19 years professional experience, which includes local government experience, so I have really looked at this whole process very carefully. We expressed grave concerns about the steadfast, and we have steadfast opposition to the City of West Sacramento's proposal to establish Reclamation District 900 and 537 as a subsidiary district to the city and their their second proposal. At the same time, we offer our resolute support for the Reclamation District's 900 alternative proposal for the reasons they have stated, and encourage the Commission to do the same. It addresses the concerns that I have heard as a result of the General Plan Update 2035, that the city have control over the storm drainage, the detention basins, and things like that, as they want to continue to place recreational activities there. First and foremost, I don't think Yolo LAFCo has justified the need to address, to accept the city's proposal. The reclamation districts have been doing a great job so far, and they've been managing the financing very well, high-performing and cost-effective in the provision of services. They are responsible to the community needs, and that also goes with the concerns of the social justice issues. They are, we are a bathtub, and as a result of that, anything that happens is going to affect everybody, and they represent the city very well. All landowners and all renters, business people, they represent the city very well, and they're also working collaborative with our police and firefighters. And with regard to the financial management of the districts, LAFCo states government agencies have limited financial resources and are under pressure to find ways to spread cost. One of the things that I heard from our mayor is that it will go to the city council regardless. City manager and the staff will be preparing reports to address the city council. So there will be staff time in addition to all the time that our attorney has spent to address the liability issue. Liability issue is real. And as LAFCo have stated in the report, the city can absorb the liability, and I have grave concerns with that as well. Both Bill Christoph and I are really concerned about that. And so that's one of the other main reasons why. And in addition to that, one of the things that a municipal service review for the Sacramento-Yolo Port District demonstrated in May 2019 that the Sacramento-Yolo Port District Commission, as a subsidiary district model to the city, may not be operated in the best interest of the district. It notes that the district has a dedicated chief operating officer who handles nearly all the port's management, budgeting, and planning responsibilities. Despite that, it's also paying 50% of the city's manager's salary and benefits, which does not appear to be an efficient staff cost from the district's perspective, nor is it supported by the analysis. So,
Council member, I'm sorry, but we've run out of time. In fairness to everybody, we've got to
that's fine.
moving.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Martha.
You're welcome.
Christy Jordan.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much. I've read the staff report, and I support your recommendation to adopt the resolution. I live in the north side of the town. My son represents the fifth-generation Broderick family. My grandfather was born at 4th and B Streets in Broderick in 1910. My neighbors do not reside in one of the, are not landowners in one of the reclamation districts. Our land is not in that existing district. But their decisions affect us, affect potentially our lives. My neighbors and I have no representation, no vote. So we live in a democracy. We have the opportunity to vote for our city leadership. This resolution is in the best interest of all of my Broderick neighbors who otherwise would not have a voice. This is not a reflection on the fine work that RD 900 has done and it will continue to do. I am asking you to adopt this. I want the RDs to be part of the city's big picture and future plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, next we have, Matthew Hargrove. And we have your letter.
Thank you for coming to West Sacramento for this hearing. We really appreciate it. As a lifelong resident, I'd like to welcome you. This city hall didn't exist when I was a kid. When I say when I was a kid, that's about 1980, so I'm a child of the 70s, early 80s. The city hall wasn't here. My sister worked at the Taco Bell that was here. Our riverfront was a bunch of industrial buildings at the time, a lot of them abandoned. Some stuff was happening, not a lot going on there. Now our riverfront has a bunch of homes and residents living there, and I hope that you've come to the barn and you've enjoyed some of West Sacramento's fun at the barn. Southport, when I was a kid, we used to go ride motorcycles out there. There was about 3 clumps of houses out there, but the rest of it was agricultural. There wasn't a lot out there. That's what the RDs were out there for, is because there weren't a lot of, it was agricultural, it was rural. We all know that's why the reclamation districts were designed. Southport's no longer like that. Southport is, as somebody described last night, a sea of houses. Now, I don't know that I agree with that, but there are a lot of houses out there. It has become a suburban area. This is a rural area here in West Sacramento. It's time for the city to have all the special districts underneath their governance, the exact recommendation that your predecessors did in 1979. It's time for that self-determination by West Sacramento residents to finally come to complete fruition. Now, I think the RDs are great. I'm friends with people who are on the management board. I think they've done a fine job, but this is some evolution. This is the city of West Sacramento moving forward and seeing that self-determination happen. People saying, or if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't agree with that. It is broke. It is outmoded. There's not consistent service to all parts of the city. RD 900 is fantastic. If you live in the southern part of the city, you get great service. You could probably find one of their board members to talk to, and that's wonderful. If you have a commercial property up in the northwest of the city, you're probably getting good service there too. If you live in Broderick or Bright, you have no RD happening right now. And the city has one consistent police force, one consistent firefighters. We have Parks and Rec who service the whole city. We have Public Works who service the whole city. Why do we have a fractured system of governance to service flood protection? If it's as important as everyone is saying, let's bring it together under one set of management that has vision, that has everybody at heart, and where there's votes from the city. Right now, you can't vote. You asked the question earlier, when was the last election? It wasn't actually answered. There hasn't been an election as far as I can remember, and I've owned property here since the 1990s.
Mr. Hargrove, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe DeAnda. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Thank you again for meeting here and to the staff. I just wanted to touch on one point. I wish the mayor was still here. I tend to not agree on many issues with him, but I do wholeheartedly agree on his statements about representation and having seats at the table, especially for Brighton Broderick. And so that's why I really look forward to him and his other council members joining Martha Guerrero and her leadership under the current effort to move to district elections in West Sacramento, because that's really what that's also about too. So look forward to working with them on that. Despite what some of the comments have made, you know, this is not about our city's progress, development of the riverfront, or how long you've lived here. My family goes back to the 1800s. That is really irrelevant to this issue. For me, also should state, as noted earlier, I am a trustee on the board of Reclamation District 900. I am speaking in my capacity as a resident and landowner. I live a stone's throw to the Deepwater Channel. My house abuts pretty much the channel area coming into the port of West Sacramento. My issue is liability. I have a family. I think the liability issue has been debated by both sides, and there's arguments on both sides. But I think we all know that it's never really going to be determined until it's actually taken up in court. Nobody wants to see that happen, because that means there would have been a catastrophic levee failure. Claims would be made for loss of property and life. And ultimately, the court is going to decide that question, who's liable. I don't want to take that risk, and I certainly don't understand why the city is willing to take that risk as well. They have an unprotected general fund that could be tapped to pay claims in such an instance, whereas the Reclamation District's assessment is protected from those types of claims. but further than all of that and all of the presentation that we had today, which, lays out valid points on both ends, I think, you have to look at a couple of things. And you're all political people, most of you, and you know that it's often the underlying issues that don't present themselves in staff reports and legal arguments that are behind causes. And that's what we have here today. It's been mentioned, the tentacles of control by the city that far reach beyond this building. That's what this is about. You asked about dollars and that there isn't going to be any outright shifting of funds. No, but what's going to happen is the city, as they pursue their master parks and trails plan that do take place on levees, is going to have the Reclamation District use their funds for maintenance and operation, freeing up that money that would have otherwise been held by the city. And so those are the ways I think that you have to examine this. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom McDuffie.
I used to be able to run up there. Thank you. Thank you for coming. My name is Tom McDuffie. I have one bullet, and it's just going to probably go off in the air. But one thing I don't think a lot of these people realize is we talk about districts that were absorbed or taken over. Does anybody remember Proposition 13? That's what caused it all. Proposition 13, all of those fire departments over there in West Sacramento, Bright, and Westgate, they were functioning just properly. They had the ability to collect taxes based on what they needed to spend, but they were thrifty. No mistakes were made. Proposition 13 didn't give us any money to take care of these three districts. LAFCo assisted in the 1979 report that I can't find, it's not available on the internet, that we best put a merger together, form a JPA. I was part of it. It was the most miserable experience I ever lived. Created a lot of hard feelings for many years. I'm sure that they're still there. See, because of my age, I forget. I had a good point here. If you were to say to me, Tom, what can we do to stop this? What would you agree to? I'd say, gentlemen, from what I've heard today, and I feel a lot of dissension in here, I would say, I'd like you to hold this whole thing in abeyance until we reach that 200-year floodplain and the city takes over with a clean deck of cards. That would be my request. I don't know if it's not possible, but I don't think it's going to go like this. There's not going to be good feelings come out of this. You hold it in abeyance until a 200-year floodplain, discuss it again. I think you'll have a different outcome. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Maria, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pronounce this correctly. Grijalva.
Yeah, Grijalva.
Actually, it was your handwriting that did me.
Oh, yes, my chicken scratch, yes, yes. Yeah, that'll do it. Thank you so much for coming here today. It's actually a pleasure to see you here. And what I need to talk to you really briefly about is, as former candidate for mayor Joe D'Anda had mentioned, is the underlining factors at play here. And this is really about governance. And this is where I'm going to beg you, literally beg you, to have an open mind and not let anyone pull the wool over your eyes. Because what we're talking about here is public trust, ethics, values, morals. The tactics that the city uses are very, very common, and that's why there is so much public distrust. For example, the letter that was sent directly to the LAFCo director, instead of sending it the proper channel, this is the same way that the city is handling the petition that I've submitted to introduce district elections. We have at-large elections, which are not good for us. We have statistically proven that we have polarized voting. We have the analysis, and our city has indicated that they're willing to go the whole 9 yards and spend as many taxpayers' dollars as necessary to prove that we don't have polarized voting. And so the at-large election and keeping the at-large election is part of the other underlining factors here. The other part of the governance, the history of the governance, is the way crime was handled in the city of West Sacramento. The way that crime was handled is that an old-fashioned gang injunction was implemented, which took away our rights in the north area of the city. And in fact, West Sac PD is actually getting sued because of their own tactics in applying the law. And so it's really important that you know about these things, because I've been made a mockery of, in addition. I actually stood here, and the mayor made misogynistic statements after I left on Facebook in public. And when he was interviewed, he did not apologize for them. And so another example of governance is when we had 12 pedestrians killed in a 6-month period. I came here and I begged for lit-up crosswalks. We never got them. The last thing that you need to know about is, if many residents and other people, if you walk up to the mayor and he doesn't like you, he'll just walk away. And you're standing there like, oh, what happened? Did I just... what do I do now? And the mayor walks away from you. You need to know these things. It's very important. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. All right, next is Tom Ramos.
Thanks for letting me come back. One last thing on liability. What Jeff Mitchell, the city attorney, described to me is the city is putting itself on a tightrope. They are going to have control without having control. And the whole idea of being able to pierce through that is very flexible, and it just takes one mistake, or not even mistake, but just one initiative to have that pierced, and the consequences could come. But on to that, I think what was brought up earlier about misrepresentation, I think the offer of RD 900 to seek public elections, I think solves that issue rather well. The other thing I was going to cover is a little bit on LAFCo's mantra of consolidation and efficient and transparent government. And yes, municipal government is the preferred alternative, but there is a role for single-purpose districts, and it's mentioned in many studies that are done, and one of those areas is flood governance. You talk to people in the flood industry, and they'll say, you got to have the focused thing. And the flood board, I think she mentioned, won't pick sides on this, but talk to them personally, and they'll tell you that they would prefer an independent, capable, and single-focused local maintaining agency there to do the job. But, kind of lastly, I want to discuss good practices in flood governance. I'm involved not just as a trustee, but also as a member of the the West Sacramento Flood Control Agency. Contrary to what someone said that that's city council members, it's not. It's 3 members, 2 of the reclamation districts and the city. And that's a model that's used throughout the Central Valley. And what it does, basically what we have here is a 3-legged stool of responsibilities. And that's improving infrastructure, the projects, that's the JPA, long-term maintenance, that's the reclamation districts, and the attentive to the floodplain management, and that's the city. This model has proven successful to attract billions of dollars of state and federal funds for flood protection. West Sacramento is on the cusp of achieving our our flood protection standards through this model. Don't change it. We are changing something now that is not broken. And as of that, I recommend you reject the city's application and accept RD 900s. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, and next We have Dan Ramos.
Thank you for allowing me to talk tonight, talk again. I'll be brief. I just wanted to make sure I read this into the record because I think it's important. This is, as a representative of RD 900, and our board is fully behind this. This is a proposal for legislation to modify the manner of electing the Board of Trustees of Reclamation District 900. RD 900 is prepared to commit in the form of a condition of approval of the RD 900 alternative proposal or otherwise to seek and therefore support legislation specific to RD 900 to the effect that commencing with the 2022 general election, 3 trustees of RD 900 must be residents of West Sacramento but need not be landowners or legal representatives of landowners, be elected by registered voters within the city of West Sacramento in a consolidated election for a 4-year term of office. Commencing with the 2026 general election, the remaining 2 trustees of RD 900, so as to provide for staggered terms in the continuity of the Board of Trustees, who must be residents of West Sacramento, but needed be landowners or legal representatives of landowners, will be elected for 4-year terms by the registered voters within the city of West Sacramento at a consolidated election. Thereafter, trustees would be elected on staggered basis in the same manner with the same residency requirements. I'll go ahead and hand this to the clerk in terms of if there's an opportunity to have this be part of your solution and alternative. We would highly recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And lastly, we have Kevin Langford.
Morning. My name's Kevin Langford. I grew up in West Sacramento, and I see a lot of faces that I know and some new ones. I left in 2012 to serve in the Army. And coming back here, it's appalling to have this be my first meeting and see how divided this city really is now. Yeah. We're not the North, the South. We're West Sacramento. If you guys drive, the board members drive through the city, like I have, but don't avoid the potholes that the city has failed to maintain, and then tell me they're going to maintain my levee. I remember in 2006 when the rivers came about 3 feet from the top, boils were all over the south side. RD 900 were the guys that were out there. The city wasn't there. And to mention the barn, I'd love to go there, and I'm glad after 4 years of completion, they finally have working bathrooms so that we can all actually enjoy it. And if that is an exact representation of how this city is going to treat the levees, by overlooking the simplest thing in a building, being the bathrooms, then I implore you to not allow them to take over the levee systems. Or else we'll be swimming as much as the representatives of this city have around the questions that they've been asked. We have no answers. We just have questions. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, I made a mistake. I skipped over Bill Denton's card. Bill would like very much to hear from you.
Michael,
I'm sorry, Dan.
That's perfectly all right.
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Bill Denton, and thank you very much for coming to West Sacramento. It's probably the best place to live in the county. I've been here for a long time. I was on Reclamation District Board 900 for 50 years. So I know how they operate. I know what they do. I was the first chairman of the West LAFCo. I was on that for 14 years. I have devoted a lot of time to this area. My first job I had was an appointment to a county housing appeals board and so on down the line, a whole list of them. But to get to the point, West Sacramento is proud, should be proud, to have RD 900 and 537. They're outstanding people. I've seen the work at night and waited out there with the with different people. We have a guy back here that, our superintendent, that he sleeps out here when it's bad, when the weather's bad. He sleeps. And we've got people that come up in their own cars and their own trucks, and they drive the levee just to keep our trucks and our employees awake and whatnot, because they work all night long. And I don't know whether you ever seen a guy in front of a trash rack with water up to his chin trying to keep a pump going. You'll find them in West Sacramento at RD 900. We're very, very proud of them. The best honor I ever had was being a member of that group. Based on that, the last time I talked to the mayor, I brought up the subject of his money, commingling of city money with a streetcar program and a West Sacramento flood control program monies, and commingling them, and I thought that was wrong. It shouldn't happen that way. One of the problems we have in the past is the city has come up with a plan for a developer to run his stuff through the plant, through into the ditches and stuff, and the city comes along and puts in a park or something of that nature, and we don't get, Reclamation District didn't get notified of it. We sat there, and then the paperwork would come out, and we'd get it finally. They never asked us how much flood control we could take, or how much water, how deep the ditch has to be. We've cleaned up culverts for the city from day one. That's about it, I guess.
Well, Bill, thank you very much, and I apologize for skipping over your card. I don't know how I did that, but I've seen your name throughout this report, and however this turns out, your longtime service is very much appreciated by the people of West Sacramento, I know, and it's a pleasure having you here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I don't get out too much anymore.
All right, Michael, I think you wanted to address the commission.
I think we all need to stand up.
And Michael, before we start the timer, can you spell your last name for me?
LOKTEFF.
Locktoff.
Locktiff.
Locktiff.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. And I think that I can hardly say anything else. This has been such an entertaining meeting for me. I came here as a little boy, a refugee out of China. I was born in China and then went through a refugee camp in the Philippines and came to Bright. My dad, it was November, and he kneeled down and kissed the ground. Actually, I remember I was a boy. And he says, Mike, Misha, get on your knees and thank God for this country. That's how refugees appreciated this country that came through revolutions, repressions, and so on. This is the country, the land of the free, the home of the brave. And I have a minute 40. And I can say this, that there's been so many words here already and wonderful kind of comments. I called the office and Christine answered the phone herself. We chatted a little bit. I said, wouldn't it be great if out here we did a dance? She's 6 feet something, and I'm 5 feet something. So, but my commitment to this country to this city, to this county, is deep because I went to high school in Woodland. And on the river road, on the bus every morning. And I used to have some problems with some people during the Red Scare, where America and Russia almost came to war. And we did slide under the seats for safety from possible Russian bombers. Therefore, it's very natural that boys will be boys, and I, being as small as I am, the boys thought it was good to pick on me.
Michael, we need to bring this to a close.
I am.
But how can you tell us how you feel about the, do you like the?
Absolutely. I read several of the documents, the grand jury report, very carefully. I read the staff report very carefully, and the RD 900 proposal, and of course the city proposal. And I'll just read one paragraph from the grand jury. The quality and quantity work performed.
We need to cut this off. Can you just tell us which proposal you favor? The RD
If it
900
ain't
proposal
broke,
or the? Don't
don't
fix it.
fix it.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
I thought you wanted to hear my story.
We do. We do. Very interesting. Thank you.
August 22nd.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard, who hasn't spoken? Okay. We'll close the public hearing. And now the commission itself has an opportunity to discuss this. Initially, I think we need to allow commissioners the opportunity to disclose who they may have talked to about this issue prior to the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, in the past few days, I was approached by West Sacramento City Council member Chris Ledesma. I spoke with him on the telephone. He was asking me if I had questions. I don't think there was any information in that conversation that hasn't been presented to us here today or in the materials that we have before us. I also had outreach from Dan Ramos and Tom Ramos. I met with them in my office yesterday, and I believe that again, I think that through their public comments today and their various communications, that the issues that they raised were not unique to that conversation. They were the same issues that we've heard today about liability, their concerns about liability and cost of service. We did talk about the elections for their board, for the boards of the reclamation districts, and that information was shared with you all today in this testimony.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Stollard?
Yes, a couple of weeks ago, Michael Lockteff came over to my office and entertained me with stories. Thank you, Michael. Again, nothing that has not been shared today. Dan and Tom Ramos also visited with me in my office and presented their points of view as they have today. Christopher Cabalden telephoned me yesterday to ask if I had questions, and I did discuss the liability issue with him, and it has been well covered today. And at a prior time, I did ask Councilwoman Bab Sandine about her perspective on this, and I don't even recall the substance of our discussion. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sandy?
Thank you, Chair. Over the past couple of weeks, I have met with Dan and Tom Ramos. They came over to visit me in Woodland. I appreciated that. Was on the end of a receiving call from Mayor Cabalden. He and I discussed the issue briefly. I've discussed it with Councilmember Martha Guerrero, discussed it briefly with Councilwoman Bab Sandine, and I've also had a conversation with West Sacramento resident Matthew Hargrove over the past couple of weeks. These have been pretty broad, general discussions with nothing that hasn't come out in these presentations today.
Okay. Commissioner Arnold?
My conversations mirror Commissioner Sandy's, other than I didn't have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Hargrove, but I did speak with Dan and Tom Ramos at some length on the phone, as well as the mayor and council members Guerrero and Sandine, in very limited capacity. And again, nothing that was part of that conversation hasn't been discussed thoroughly in these proceedings.
Very good. And for myself, I met yesterday in their offices with Tom and Dan Ramos. Nothing discussed there that we haven't discussed today, as I recall.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is a comment that perhaps Mr. may have guidance for, but the grand jury report was released while this matter has been pending before the LAFCo Commission. They did conduct interviews of a number of parties. I was one of those parties, so the interview questions that were posed and the report that was published could that be considered ex parte communication?
I don't think so, in the sense that when they were conducting the interview, you were conveying information to them. They weren't giving you necessarily information that would weigh on these proceedings. If you feel differently, if there was something that you didn't know or that wasn't otherwise disclosed, let me know real quick and we can talk about it.
Very good. I think we're ready to move on. Just to get the wheels going here, I'm going to read the motion as its summary that's been prepared for me, and then we can have our discussion. We're going to determine that the project, if the staff recommendation goes forward, we're going to determine that the project is exempt from CEQA per the CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3 and 15320, and direct staff to file a notice of exemption. We are going to adopt Resolution 2019-10, approving LAFCo Organization Proposal Number 926, subject to terms and conditions. And as previously discussed, we will delegate the conducting authority to the executive officer if there should be a protest hearing. And then if this is approved, if this motion is approved, then we would deny application number 925 as unnecessary and deny application number 930 as inferior to application number 926 as conditionally approved. So that is the motion, or that will be the motion. Now, discussion, comments, further questions for city staff or for the Reclamation District?
I think that the questions have been, I think we've had plenty of time for questions and answers over the past 2 years, and then beyond. Some of the issues that are important to me, I think, are identified in our commission staff report. I believe that the executive officer has done a tremendous job of navigating a complicated set of issues. I do believe that the 1979 MSR and the discussion of what will follow upon the point of the city being well established and the build-out activities taking place that's a sensible thing. I think that the community dissension on this topic and other unrelated matters that have been referred to in public comments here today those are matters of what happens here in West Sacramento. And one of the things that's interesting to me about this process is that if we adopt the motion that's recommended to us, there will be this protest process that allows a sense of a formal way of gauging the sentiment of the community through the various thresholds of requesting, of protesting, then having an election or not. And LAFCo is not in a position, I don't believe, to assess the trust issues that are being described by community members. one way or another. I'm satisfied with the materials that are presented to us and in our staff report and in the various hearings that we've conducted on this, that the recommendation before us is a sensible one. I think it is a reasonable compromise with the setting up of the subsidiary districts. The dynamics within the community, I think, can be addressed through the process that would follow.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Sandy.
Thank you, Chairman. I have spent, as I mentioned, time over the past several weeks discussing this with people. At each turn, I pled with them to solve the issue on your own, which is to say, have West Sacramento make its own decisions and reach its own compromise without the benefit of our oversight. I still wish that had happened. I believe that's the best and most effective way for a local community to reach decisions like this. It didn't happen. That's unfortunate. So here we are today. I'm principally concerned, I suppose, with the governance issues and the fact that I believe in this day and age, with the evolution of communities that we're seeing rapidly, the evolution of special districts, which is undergoing very rapid change. The way things have been are not the way that they will be tomorrow. And I realize that that change is disconcerting and aggravating and often threatening to people. But regardless, it's going to happen. We presided over a meeting just this past week of rural volunteer fire districts, which are beginning to fail. They no longer can complete their duties because society has changed. It's difficult to find people that turn out for volunteer fire districts anymore. Fewer people, more workload, more equipment expenses. It's really a challenge now how we're going to meet the needs of the rural areas with fire districts. This is another issue where a district has existed for a long time. It's done an admirable job. I believe that it is populated and served by very good people who have taken their responsibilities seriously. I also, as a former city official myself, have great confidence in the ability of cities to govern themselves and to provide up-to-date, effectively delivered services, and I have every confidence that that will happen here. So in addition to the governance and the rapid change that's occurring that I think is just a factor, I'm admiring of the spirit of West Sacramento. I appreciate the heartfelt sentiments that you've expressed here today. I think many of them are compelling. I wish that some of the changes that have been proposed had happened earlier, when they could have happened in an easier way, and they didn't take place until we reached this decision today, because I think they would have benefited the community. Finally, I'm concerned that we have an area which is significant to the city, which has been underserved for many years, which isn't covered by the district as presently configured. And the fact that it's been left that way for many years is of grave concern to me, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Consequently, reluctantly, I'm going to support this proposal.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Stollard.
I would just like to say how much I respect and appreciate the community of West Sacramento. It was my privilege to be a supervisor representing the Bright and part of Broderick areas many years ago, and I have seen amazing progress over here. It's really not fair to comment on a non-working piece of technology. We have plenty of it in the city of Woodland. It's just a challenge. But you didn't have this beautiful building. You had nothing that I see out on the street around me here. And the library was half what it is today. So I think you should be so proud of what you've accomplished here. I think it's tremendous, and I like the idea of it being one community, but I know you've got your pride in your neighborhoods, and the city respects that, and I'm glad about that too. So I wish the city continued progress. You know, I do agree with the mayor when he said you have a lively democracy here. You have contention, but you know, at least we don't shoot each other when we walk out of the room. At least I hope nobody has plans of that sort. You know, we just have to work the best we can. This is our democratic system, you know. This is what Michael's dad brought him and his family to this country for. And we do the best we can. Our job up here, as I see it, is not to resolve your differences as a community. That's your responsibility among yourselves. And you've done it at the polls. And I hope those of you who are unsuccessful will continue to make efforts to achieve success if you feel your message will grow and resonate. I also want to tell you as a community, districts aren't the end of the world. You know, some people may think so, but we have it in Woodland now, and I think it's actually working quite well. So, you know, if the city goes that way, perhaps inside districts, you'll be able to resolve some of the differences that are more difficult to resolve community-wide. In any event, you know, the city is a mature city. It has proven itself successful. Many citizens don't understand that funding is such a unique thing. So we have funding for our roads, we have funding for our parks. They're not the same places. You can't move money around willy-nilly. You have to account for it. The idea of the subsidiary district, which I didn't understand at the front end of all of this, but I do now, is a good model for maintaining isolation of funding, isolation of budgeting, and reporting so that people will be able to see what's going in and how it's being used. That doesn't mean the city can't exercise its discretion, and you as citizens have the ability to hold their feet to the fire. But I adopt the comments of my prior colleagues who have spoken here. It's a changing world. And there's nothing broken about RD 900 or necessarily 537 either. They have served the community really well. It was an early 20th century model essential for the times that were then. And I would say it's still a fine model, but it's now been succeeded by a city which has now proven its ability to take care of its service territory, in my view. And it was foreseen when the city was created that RD 900 would essentially be absorbed into the city one way or another. So, you know, I'm sorry, that's the way I see it. I don't like disappointing people, but I'm looking at it from a LAFCo perspective. I also want to express appreciation, Christine, to you. This represents an enormous amount of analysis. And, you know, I mean, I have no real dog in the fight other than I hope I do my job here as a LAFCo commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Arnold.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what some of my colleagues have said, particularly in regard to whatever decision is made by this body is not a referendum on the performance of either of the reclamation districts in question, but particularly the one we're dealing with is RD 900. Their staff or their leadership, by all accounts, they continue to perform their charge effectively. And it is the intention, I believe, of the recommendation put forward that effective performance of duty continue. And there is no sense that I get that anyone wants to change how business has been done in terms of flood protection and levee maintenance in this area. I believe the crux of our action today is very specific to the issue of governance, and the reclamation districts rightfully say that they've been performing their duties for more than 100 years, but there's an idea that's even older than that, and that it's that everyone and not just landowners ought to have the right to vote on even the most important issues. The representatives from RD 900 indicate that their board of landowners voted to offer that the city control internal drainage. We've also heard a willingness on their part to change the board structure to allow for more public participation in the democratic process. But I don't think we ought to depend on the largesse of landowners to have democratic control of these critical public functions, including critical public safety functions. And as we know, lower income folks, younger folks, people with disabilities, people with certain racial backgrounds are less likely to be landowners and are yet equally impacted, maybe even in the case of low income folks, more impacted by flood, and they ought to have a voice in this matter. And as an elected city council member myself, I'll just say that I take some issue with the idea that this function is beyond the ability of our democratically elected leaders. It's those very elected leaders of this fine city who have made this request and indicated that it is a huge priority for the city that they're elected to lead. And if you don't agree that this ought to be a priority for the city, there's a process to vote out those council members. So it's with great respect to the continued professional efforts of the reclamation districts that I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, and for myself, I don't think I can add much to what's already been said very eloquently and on a personal level in many cases by the commissioners. I'll just point out that I very much appreciate the passion and the dedication of the staffs of and the boards of the reclamation districts, both of them. It's unusual, and clearly you've got a lot of folks that feel the same way. So with that, I think we're ready to go to a vote. I stated the motion.
I
If
move
anyone-
approval of the recommended actions 3 through 5 in our staff report.
I will second that.
It's been moved by Saylor and seconded by Sandy.
And Chair, just to be clear, with the addition of the delegation of the conducting authority to the executive director.
So
Is that
accept that.
acceptable?
Yes.
To the seconder?
You state
All right.
Executive officer.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. Thank you all for being here. And we are now on item number 7, back to the regular agenda, which is consider 2019 LAFCo Board of Director nominations for 1 city member and 1 public member for the Central Region. And Tom, since you were on LAFCo last time, the LAFCo is broken up into different regions, and we're part of the Central Region, thanks largely to...
Like a little reclamation district back in the day.
Thanks to Helen. We're in the Central District and not the Northern District. She supported that pretty strongly. Anyway, there's 1 city member position and 1 public member position that's available. Is anyone interested, Commissioner Arnold or Commissioner Stollard, in that position for the city position?
I didn't say I was interested in running for the city position.
No, I asked.
Oh.
I was asking.
Well, it looks like the incumbents are both running again, and I've heard reports that they're both great people. Is that great?
I know the public member is good. And Christine, can you give us any insight on the city member? That position
in public
in
session.
play?
My understanding from talking with the LAFCo Executive Director, Pamela Miller, is that the city member from Fresno has some engagement issues, so, and doesn't always engage. But is that the kind of feedback you're asking for?
Yes, thank you. She it sounds like she would be welcome. She'd be interested in having some competition.
All right. Will?
No, thanks.
I would nominate Will.
I'm sure you would. So, no, I'm not. I decline respectfully the nomination. I
All
will
right.
not
Tom, are
run,
you
and if
interested?
elected,
The problem, the problem with us city members is we rotate so frequently.
Right.
Isn't it 2 years we're up here?
4. You have 4.
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't think it's something I would have time for.
All right, very good. We'll pass on that one. And on the public
We
member...
might ask Councilmember Sandine if she'd be interested.
Would you be interested, Bev? Thank you.
She said yes.
Speechless.
We nominate
that's a
Bev.
yes. I saw a thumbs up and a nod based on my poor eyesight.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's not, every county LAFCo has the opportunity to nominate a candidate, correct?
Yes, there's probably, off the top of my head, probably 10 to 12 counties in the Central Region. So the incumbents are running for these seats again, and there's opportunity in other counties
I
for
think
people
you'd
to
be
run.
excellent, Bev, if you're interested and you can spare the time. But-
Let's not ask her. I'm nominating her.
Are you willing?
Did you see did you get a copy of the packet? They meet, they meet 4 or 5 times a year, rotate around the state.
And it's, I think you should do it.
I'm not sure as an alternate she's eligible.
Second.
Okay.
All right. It's been moved and seconded that if an alternate is eligible, the commission would like to nominate Bev Sandine if after an opportunity to evaluate things, you remain interested. Is that okay?
That's pretty easily, well done.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Chair Woods, who seconded the motion?
Gary.
I did.
Thank you.
All right, and then with respect to the public member, there is an excellent incumbent, and my plate is very full at the moment, and so I would decline seeking a nomination from the commission. All right, we're ready then to move on to item number 8, which is consider the LAFCo 2019 Achievement Award nominations. Christine?
How many categories they have.
Thank you, Chair Woods. This is something that LAFCo solicits every year at their annual conference. There's an awards banquet, and awards are given out in these various categories. We've been very successful over the years to put in nominations that have been awarded. This is optional. There's no requirement that we put anything forward. And just to note again for the commission, I'm not even going to be at the conference because I'm going to be out of the country at the time. So it is perfectly acceptable to just pass and not put any hats in the ring.
Very good. And I just second Christine's comments. We have been very successful over the years in submitting our own nominations with our own LAFCo, but also recognizing other LAFCos throughout the state. So if the commission's comfortable with no nominations, we'll move forward. Okay, now we come to item number 9, the executive officer's report. Christine?
I hope you all received the updated long-range meeting calendar that went out in the supplemental packet. There's been a number of things moving around on our upcoming tentative agendas. We had the protest hearing for this item today scheduled for August, but that's not going to be able to occur within required timelines. And we also just received a letter handed to me immediately after the action that RD 900 is triggering a provision in the code that'll push out the protest process 90 to 135 days. So we will get back to you on when that meeting will be scheduled, and as per the commission direction, that hearing's going to happen outside of a regular LAFCo meeting. Also this week, we received a new application for an out-of-agency services for the Watts Woodland Airport, which we're going to schedule on our August hearing date. And also, we will consider the LAFCo response to the grand jury report in August. So just again to remind everyone, we don't typically have an August meeting date. We scheduled one with my departure on September 3rd. So just to highlight, there is an August meeting. I apologize, and we'll move forward from there. So, and then other than that, the Executive Officer's Activity Report is attached as always. I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you.
You're showing no September agenda items yet, but you reserved the September 26th date? I see, okay.
I just put the meeting dates there for now. I think what's going to happen with the September and October meetings is we will hopefully consolidate any items onto one or the other meetings.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So to clarify, the August meeting will likely be in Woodland then, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, with that then, we will move on to item number 10, which is commissioners' reports. Commissioner Stollard, anything?
No report today.
Commissioner Saylor? Commissioner Sandy?
Not except to express my appreciation to Christine and Terry for the great work you do day in and day out, under the maxim that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You do the best you can to prepare me, and I apologize if sometimes that seems to be, have had no impact whatsoever. So thank you. I just want you to know I appreciate everything you do.
I'd like to make a comment on,
Yes.
I thought that the commissioners' comments on this matter before us today were quite eloquent, and other than mine, I appreciate everything that you all said, and I think you did a good job of weaving through and getting the bottom line, but all for different reasons, all within the context of our requirements as LAFCo, as commissioners. But I really appreciated your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say something similar, but I'll envelop your comments into that. So we won't exclude what you said.
Can everybody vote on it, just not just property owners?
Yeah.
In the comments?
Yeah, right. Oh, as a renter, did I get to vote? Sorry. Sorry.
All right. Christine and Eric, and thanks also for putting together, Christine, a really good team, including Mr. Colatano. It was a very smart move and very helpful. So not just his presence here today and Eric's, but the lead up to this, I know, very well done. Thank you. Okay, anything else? We are adjourned.